Zimbabwe simuka udzosere, Zimbabwe simuka, Zimbabwe simuka udzosere, pawakaurawa. Zimbabwe simuka Zanu PF, vauraya nyika. Zimbabwe simuka. Mubasa kwandinoshanda, ndobira mumutsitsi. Nichambire mari yangu, kumira mumutsitsi. Baba here, ndozorora rini. Zimbabwe simuka Zanu PF, vauraya. Mafuta edzimota kumira mumutsitsi. Nitengere mhuri yangu, ndobira mumutsitsi. Baba here, simuka. Zimbabwe simuka Zanu PF. Kana ndichida chingwa, pamwe hapana. Kana ndichida petu, pamwe hapana. Kana ndichida shuga, pamwe hapana. Niende kuchipatara, hapana. Simuka. Kana ndichida uchingwa, pamwe hapana. Kana ndichida shuga, pamwe hapana. Uzoti ndada mari, pamwe hapana. Mari Botswana makwerekwere, uyaitiranganyika. Mari Joburg.
Good day to you all, Change Radio viewers and listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of Letter from America. The topic of today's episode is Mnangagwa and Zanu, unwilling and unable, and will never restore rule of law and democracy in Zimbabwe. We have a video by Portia Nyakujga, which we're going to play. And after the video has played, we can have a short question and answer session where we can read comments and address any questions where we can. And potentially, viewers and listeners can come into the studio to give their comments. So without much ado, let's get into the video.
From America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Letter from America is broadcast on Change Radio, an internet-based radio station of the Zimbabwean diaspora and friends from around the world. Change Radio is aimed specifically at giving Zimbabweans and friends at home and abroad news, information, and a diversity of perspectives that are not available to them in the heavily government-controlled broadcast media in the country. The opinions and views expressed in Letter from America are solely those of the presenter and not necessarily of Change Radio. Letter from America. Today's topic is Mnangagwa and Zanu PF are unwillingly unable and will never restore democracy and rule of law in Zimbabwe. I am Portia Nyakujga. Documentary movie The President, which premiered last week, Friday in New York, will bring to America a new narrative about the struggle for democracy in Zimbabwe. The documentary by Camilla Nilsson focuses on the MDC Alliance campaign in the general elections of 2018. In one way, the documentary is a new narrative in that it portrays MDC Alliance President Nelson Chamisa's youth that represents Zimbabwe's population. Chamisa is 43 years old, and 70% of Zimbabwe's population of 14 million is below 40 years of age. In another way, the documentary, while focusing on the most Mugabe Zimbabwe, brings into the shadow of Zimbabwe's post-colonial period. When Mugabe was overthrown in 2017 in what was, to all intents and purposes, a military coup, thousands of Zimbabweans celebrated. They hoped the coup would mark the end of the dictatorial rule by Mugabe. They thought the incoming president, Mnangagwa, would be new wine in an old bottle. Alas, he turned out to be old wine in an old bottle. The portrayal of Chamisa as a young man is very similar to the election of John F. Kennedy as the President of the United States in 1963. He was 44 years old. Unfortunately, JFK, as he was popularly known, was assassinated in 1963. Historians described the period from 1961 to 1963 as the Kennedy era, in that it brought in a youthful president who represented the yearnings of the American people. Young Americans felt they had, at last, a voice that represented them in the White House. The election of Kennedy as president came in the middle of widespread national protests by African Americans, women, young people, gays, and lesbians, as well as people with alternative lifestyles. They all simply no longer wanted to be dictated to by the orthodoxies of social, cultural, and political norms that they were not comfortable with. The decade of the 1960s is one of the most talked about and most analyzed periods in American history because it brought protests at a massive scale that had never been experienced before. In a similar vein, the portrayal of Chamisa as a youthful leader of the MDC alliance resonates primarily with Zimbabwe's young population that feels no one speaks for them in the ZANU PF government. Both Kennedy and Chamisa had incredible charisma and appeal. They both had a strong creative command of the language they used to communicate with the grassroots communities. They were both a remarkable contrast to their political opponents. When Kennedy debated Richard Nixon in the 1960 presidential elections, people who watched the debate on TV were attracted to Kennedy by his composure, elegance, and statesmanship. Nixon, on the other hand, appeared sweaty, unprepared, disheveled, and unstable. Ainge munhu ari kubva kunganga, like some people coming from a herbalist. It would be very interesting to see how the presidential debate on television between Chamisa and Mnangagwa would turn out. Chances of such televised debates are very unlikely. But people have seen campaign rallies addressed by both during the period leading to 2018 elections. Assuming such a televised debate were to take place, and assuming the people asking questions include journalists like Hope Chingono, what kind of questions would be asked? For a start, questions for Mnangagwa would be something like, why should we elect you? What will you do for us, Zimbabweans? Mnangagwa will probably say he is the better qualified candidate for the job. For the second question, he will outline construction taking place in the whole country and say he will continue with the development of the country. Then he will be asked, we have been in government for 41 years. Why is the country in such shambles? And why are you promising this development after 41 years? Can Zimbabweans trust you after so many years of neglect? Mnangagwa will probably answer, as he always does, that people should look at his record from 2017 when he became president. He will also say whatever happened before 2017 he was not president. He will be reminded that he was a top government official since independence in 1980. Should he not take responsibility and account for all the 41 years? Instead of just 4 years, he has been president. Mnangagwa will insist he was not president until 2017, and Zimbabweans will be watching this debate. Next question will be the Gukurahundi massacres in Matabeleland between 1983 and 1986. Mnangagwa will be asked if he accepts responsibility for this genocide by the 5th Brigade. He will say he has set up a National Peace and Reconciliation Commission, which will promote an open debate and recommend what action should be taken to address those issues. He will also be asked if he will apologize to the people of Matabeleland in particular and Zimbabwe in general for such government atrocities. Mnangagwa will just leave all of that to the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission. He will be reminded that this National Peace and Reconciliation Commission was formed in 2013. It has a lifespan of 10 years and will not be renewed after 2023. As of this year, 2021, this commission has not achieved much at all. Mnangagwa will be asked whether he and Zanu PF are deliberately undermining this commission so it will die a natural death without accomplishing anything at all. Chamisa will also be asked the same questions, not having been in government except for 2008 to 2013. These questions will not be as heavy a burden on his shoulders than on his rival Mnangagwa. The advantage for Chamisa and the Movement for Democratic Change Alliance is they are not in government. As such, they do not have a record in governing the country, except for the 2008 to 2013 Government of National Unity period. At the end of the day, Zimbabweans will judge Mnangagwa by his record dating back 41 years. Mnangagwa is insisting he be judged from 2017 when he became the president. He argues he was not president before 2017 and should not be held responsible for whatever the ZANU PF government under Mugabe did. However, Zimbabweans know very well that Mnangagwa was in Mugabe's government. Mnangagwa was security minister and the mastermind of the Gukurahundi massacres. What connects Mnangagwa with Mugabe is not just that he was in Mugabe's government for 41 years, but that he has maintained Mugabe's repressive policies, corruption, and mismanagement. Today, Mnangagwa and ZANU PF are trying their best to distance the Mnangagwa government from Mnangagwa government. The President documentary movie about Chamisa reflects a desire among the young Zimbabweans for change in the country's leadership. The documentary also reflects what a Zimbabwean called Kwamvura yacheka makumbo for Mnangagwa and ZANU PF, meaning he is approaching a political and social situation which will determine his fate. The documentary movie President captures in a dramatic way the amazing differences among the crowds who attended the Chamisa and Mnangagwa rallies. Participation at Chamisa's rallies was voluntary. No one was coerced into attending the rallies. The celebratory mood among the participants was punctuated with jubilant dances, excitement, earth-shattering cheers, and clapping, ululation among women, and dancing. Chamisa himself was in jovial mood and often danced with the audiences. At one rally, it began to rain just as Chamisa was about to speak. He stopped and asked people to go home to avoid getting wet. No one left. The crowd stood their ground and insisted he address them. They enthusiastically listened to the speech in the pouring rain. Chamisa himself was offered an umbrella, but he refused and talked in drenching rain. Whenever Chamisa's motorcade arrived for a rally, he was swarmed by enthusiastic and cheering crowds even before he reached the platform where he was due to address audiences. Throughout the 2018 election campaign, Chamisa addressed more than 90 rallies. Mnangagwa reportedly addressed fewer than 20 rallies. Chamisa's ability to draw such large crowds, even in areas that were previously described as ZANU PF territory, his impressive oratory ability, his creative use of the Shona language, his youthfulness and dynamism, his ability to speak plainly about the poverty and suffering of Zimbabweans were experienced after 41 years of ZANU PF misrule endeared him to the crowds in a way no other political leader had been able to achieve. Chamisa's speeches offered comfort and hope to the impoverished Zimbabweans. Many of the MDC alliance supporters had been harassed by ZANU PF thugs. They had been intimidated into not attending the Chamisa rallies. Indeed, just like many Jews who were astonished by what the biblical Jesus was able to do, many Zimbabweans started to, and still do, define Chamisa in messianic terms for the beleaguered Zimbabweans. In trying to explain this, Chamisa charisma, one man quoted a parallel in Matthew 8, verse 27 about Jesus. What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the sea obey him. In a remarkable day and night contrast, Mnangagwa's ZANU PF rallies were largely a result of schools and businesses that had been forced to close and people coerced into attending them. Others were bused from faraway places. The presence of buses at Mnangagwa's rallies was a visible evidence of people who had been bused from far to attend. Some journalists captured images of audiences, most of whom were not even cheering, and on many occasions some of the participants were seen leaving before the end of the Mnangagwa rallies. This heaven and hell election campaign atmosphere in Zimbabwe is captured dramatically by the President documentary movie. The movie lays a framework for two or more narratives about Zimbabwe's post-colonial history. One narrative is the short-lived hope for a better life after Mugabe was removed from the office. This hope was shattered 7 months later when Mnangagwa was elected in the disputed elections of 2018. Mnangagwa immediately resorted to the Mugabe agenda and tactics, beginning with the massacre of 7 people on August 1, 2018. The next narrative is Mnangagwa's present record. This record must be viewed as a continuation of his role in Mugabe's government for 41 years. The next narrative features Chamisa and the MDC alliance as a representation of where Zimbabweans want to go. But this narrative cannot occur in isolation. It must be tied to the past and present. In the Buddhist philosophy and religion, the past, present, and future are interlinked and affect or build on each other. That means in discussing future directions, it is important to look at the present and the past. The fact that Chamisa is 43 years old and the fact that more than 70% of Zimbabweans are below 40 years of age lays a foundation for where Zimbabwe should be headed and how to get there. But in looking at Zimbabwe's youth as the major stakeholders in moving forward, Zimbabweans should be guided by lessons from and also address the past. Mugabe and Mnangagwa's ZANU PF represent violence and oppression and corruption. These evils of violence, oppression, and corruption are the daily diet for Zimbabweans today. Surviving victims of Gukuraundi and their descendants live in the very difficult conditions. Many of them grew up without knowing who their parents were and what happened to them. Many of them have no birth certificates and cannot go to school because of grinding poverty. Their homes and property were all destroyed by the 5th Brigade, who openly boasted they were Mashonas taking revenge for what King Lobengula did to them in raiding their cattle and property in 1800s. The commander of the 5th Brigade Peninsula told a group of journalists that takatumwa na Mugabe kuya ku Matebeleland kuzoshereketa shedu. We were sent by Mugabe to have fun in Matebeleland, and part of having fun resulted in the massacre of more than 20,000 innocent civilians. Both Mugabe and Mnangagwa promised to compensate the victims of Gukurahundi, but nothing has been done 41 years after this crime against humanity was committed. Today, the surviving victims of Gukurahundi are legitimately asking whether they are truly Zimbabweans and whether they truly belong to Zimbabwe. It is beyond reasonable doubt that the Mnangagwa Zanu PF party and government are both unwillingly and incapable of resolving the problems of violence, corruption, and oppressive rule. Zimbabwe is now long overdue for a new progressive government that will deal decisively with the following objectives of post-colonial Zimbabwe: restoration of democracy, restoration of and respect for the rule of law, outlawing violence, corruption, and oppressive rule, restoring the dignity and respect for the Ndebele and other minority ethnic groups in Zimbabwe, compensation for the victims of Gukurahundi and their descendants, as well as victims of politically motivated violence that was inflicted on opposition supporters by the ZANU PF thugs, bringing to justice individuals who inflicted crimes against humanity in post-colonial Zimbabwe. As Zimbabweans look to the 2023 elections as the democratic way to replace the present ZANU PF regime, Zimbabweans will be reminded that ZANU PF will never allow free and fair elections, and Mnangagwa ZANU PF will rig the elections in 2023 to achieve victory and stay in power. They have done so in all elections, especially since 2000. The historic question facing Zimbabweans is if, as expected, ZANU PF again rigs the 2023 elections, what is to be done? This is the historic question the founder of the Soviet Union, Lenin, asked in 1902. Indeed, what is it to be done, Zimbabwe? Thank you for listening. A happy festive season, happy Christmas, prosperous New Year to you all. I am Poshio Nyakujga.
So that was the video for today's episode. If there are any people who would like to come into the studio to make some contributions, we're posting the link in comments. All you need to do is just click on the link and you enter the studio and you can make some contributions. If there are no participants willing to come into the studio, then we will just call it a day. Just thanking you all for joining us today for this episode of Letter from America. The topic of today being Mnangagwa and Zanu unwilling and unable and will never restore rule of law and democracy in Zimbabwe. Something that we need to really reflect on as we go towards the 2023 elections. We need to think about what could happen if we don't succeed to remove ZANU PF and Emmerson Mnangagwa in 2023. Is there hope that things will change for the better? In the last 40 years, life in Zimbabwe has continually declined. Things have continually moved from bad to worse. There is not a single thing that has improved. Not the infrastructure, salaries, job availability, schools, hospitals, There is nothing that has improved since ZANU PF took over in 1980. And so as we are going into 2023, we are approaching a crossroads which will determine in a big way the future of Zimbabwe after 2023. There are two possibilities. Either things will get better by some miracle if we don't remove ZANU PF, or things are going to get much, much worse if we don't remove ZANU PF in 2023. So it is something that we really need to consider, the importance of coming together in 2023 and once and for all doing what it takes to remove ZANU PF. Because if we don't remove ZANU PF in 2023, chances are things are just going to get much, much worse in Zimbabwe. It looks like we have not had any viewers clicking the link to come in and make their contributions. So I would just like to remind you to make sure that you register to vote. There is a toll-free number that you can call to inquire about voter registration centers and any other questions that you might have to do with voter registration. It's a free number. It doesn't cost you anything. The number is 080-802-19. And for those who are already registered, those who registered during the previous elections in 2018, you can visit the website flighting on the screen right now to check if your name is still in the voters roll and to check if your details are still accurate and your voter registration center is the correct one that's registered. So I thank you, my dear viewers and listeners, for joining us for this episode. We're looking forward to see you again next week, same place and same time. But in the meantime, we would like to wish you a most blessed Christmas. Stay safe, stay in the protection and divine cover of the Lord. See you next time. Goodbye.
Sina funga mwe, nukutenda makamu ya mwe. Musa